Hello, in this video I'll be examining the finite dash mechanic and discover what this can teach us about game design. I'm arguing that the finite dash mechanic increases challenge in movement-centered games. I'll begin by demonstrating why this is true, then I'll explain why we should care. But first, what does this sentence even mean? The finite dash mechanic is the act of moving quickly in one direction, while temporarily losing control of your character. This includes the dash move in Celeste, the flip with your car in Rocket League, the dive in Super Mario Odyssey, or the dash in Cuphead. When I say challenge, I mean the aesthetic feeling of challenge, as is defined by the MDA framework and LeBlanc's 8 types of fun. And finally, I'm defining a movement-centered game as a game where controlling a character in a physics-based environment to overcome obstacles represents the core gameplay. To see how this mechanic leads to the aesthetic feeling of challenge, we must first look at how we're actually getting there, so we must examine the dynamic states that the mechanic produces. There are 2 main types of mechanics in games, skill and chance. The finite dash mechanic is a skill mechanic, as the outcome in the game world is entirely dependent on the player's input, with no elements of randomness. Mechanics that add skill to a game increase its challenge. Based on that logic, wouldn't adding more mechanics make the game harder, furthering the goal of increasing the level of challenge? Well, yes, but that doesn't mean the game is going to be any good. There needs to be a challenge, but the kind that stimulates the players in an interesting way. It's easy to make a difficult game, but what distinguishes a good challenging game from the bad ones are the types of skills that are required. Look at QWOP. There's really only one hard skill the player must learn, which makes it frustrating.
He's wearing fucking moon shoes.
But adding too many mechanics is also bad, as the player becomes overwhelmed with the amount of things they are required to do, and the skill required becomes memorizing what should be done at any given time. The desired skills for movement-centered games are a mix of problem-solving and dexterity. The solution is to make a mechanic that creates unique situations which require these skills to succeed, but is simple within itself. It is elegant, creating a complex system with very few parts. This brings us back to the finite dash mechanic, which works well for these reasons. At the most basic level, the dash interacts with player movement in many ways. Given which direction the player is currently looking, pointing, or diving, in games such as Celeste, Cuphead, or Rocket League, the player will move in that direction. On its own, this gives the player many intuitive ways to control the character. This is especially apparent in Rocket League, where players have poured hundreds of hours into mastering the movement controls. As there are many possible actions, the players must have the dexterity to perform them and often perform them quickly. This increases the physical skill required to succeed in the game. The finite dash mechanic also inherently creates a risk-reward situation. Since the dash can only be used a finite number of times in any given scenario, the player must decide when is the best time to use it. Much of Celeste is built on the problem-solving aspect of this, where players must decide at which point in the level they will use their dash. Cuphead is the opposite. Players must make snap decisions in real time, deciding at which point is best to avoid the onslaught of attacks they face. On top of that, the dash mechanic can combine with other mechanics, creating many Rule 3s. For example, in Celeste, the player is introduced to many mechanics that alter the player's movement. The player must figure out how the dash mechanic interacts with each of these, which creates many unique situations, and creates the potential for interesting puzzles. Since there are many possible situations, the player must figure out for themselves the correct course of action, using logical thinking. This requires the player to possess intellectual skill, further raising the skill ceiling, and juxtaposes nicely with the physical skills that are also required. Rocket League is a good example of this. The situation the player finds himself in is constantly developing, so they must constantly reevaluate what they should do and perform those actions in real time. So now that we know the dash mechanic is effective in creating challenge, why should game designers even care? The most prominent effect that the versatility and amount of depth the finite dash mechanic has naturally gives players more agency, as they are simply able to do more within the game environment. This has many positive effects, such as allowing players to approach the game in their own way. On top of this, the simplicity of the mechanic makes players feel more confident that they know how to control their character, which also helps with their feeling of autonomy. All of this contributes to the overall user experience, making the game more engaging and enjoyable to play. All this being said, simply having one strong mechanic isn't going to instantly create a good game. The whole game has to fit together, or else nothing will work. Games like Celeste, Super Mario Odyssey, and Cuphead all have good level design, and Rocket League creates a unique player-on-player situation. Without these elements, these games would fall short. In conclusion, the finite dash mechanic is an effective way of increasing challenge to create an engaging player experience that uses many facets of their skill. This examination has shown the ways the mechanic contributes to the overall aesthetic of the game. On future projects, this knowledge can be applied by attempting to work backwards from the player's perspective. After choosing the desired aesthetic, the designer can figure out the dynamic state that best supports that theme and create mechanics that will produce that dynamic. Thanks, I hope you enjoyed.